eastern shore of the Hudson River, in what is now the state of New York, there was once a small rural port known by the name of Tarrytown. This name was given it by the good housewives in the country round about because their husbands tarried about the village tavern on market days. The whole neighborhood abounds with tales and stories about strange sights and haunted spots. And like as not, the men of the village who linger on and on into the late night, while their wives were sitting watching the road for their return, were sitting before the fire at the tavern, listening to some story about a mysterious occurrence. And when a stranger wandered into town, he was certain to hear more than one tale of the headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, headless horseman, you say?
Of Sleepy Hollow, aye. It's a quiet little place about 3 miles from here.
Some say the place was bewitched by an old German doctor.
Well, I heard an old Indian chief, the wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there long before it was discovered by Henry Hudson.
But what about the headless horseman who haunts the place?
The story's told that it's the ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannonball in one of the battles during the Revolutionary War.
Aye, and the body of the trooper was buried in the churchyard. So the ghost rides forth in the gloom or darkness on his nightly quest for his head.
And from time to time he's seen by the country folk, riding as if on the wings of the wind, hurrying to get back to the churchyard before daybreak.
Well, I hope to learn more about this headless horseman. I fancy myself something of an authority on witchcraft and spirits that walk and ride the night.
What are you called, stranger?
Crane. Ichabod Crane.
Oh, Crane, the new schoolmaster. Welcome to Tarrytown.
And Sleepy Hollow.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's very nice of you to hear.
Ichabod Crane, the new schoolmaster, was properly named. He was tall, but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels. His head was small and flat on top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that his head looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the top of a hill on a windy day, with his clothes bagging and fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the spirit of famine walking the earth, or perhaps some scarecrow escaped from a cornfield.
Is that the new schoolmaster out for a stroll, Mistress Fantassel?
Yeah, it is Ichabod Crane. A conscientious man he is, too, who believes to spare the rod is to spoil the child.
Yeah.
And if I know the sound of a birch rod, Mr. Crane's scholars will certainly not be spoiled.
Indeed, a good teacher must be firm, Mistress Fantassel. But how will you manage to board such a gaunt man? He must be a huge feeder to look at him.
He has the dilating powers of an anaconda, Herr von Houten. But since he instructs our children, we must take our turn to feed and lodge him like the rest of the neighborhood. And he gets along with the children wonderfully and is a singing master to boot.
A remarkable man.
Yeah.
And so he was, Ichabod Crane. On Sundays at the little church, his voice resounded far above the rest of the congregations, and some say there are peculiar quavers still to be heard in that church, and which may even be heard a half a mile off on a Sunday morning, which are said to be descended from the nose of Ichabod Crane. And the good people of Sleepy Hollow, as they sat by their doors at the evening, were often filled with awe at hearing the nasal melody of Ichabod floating from some distant hill or along the dusky road. But Ichabod Crane enjoyed fearful pleasures and passed many long winter evenings with the old Dutchmen and their wives, who sat spinning by the fire with a row of apples roasting and sputtering along the hearth, listening to and telling marvelous tales of ghosts and goblins.
It was 2 years ago in January when I was coming home late past the giant tree where Major Andre was captured.
The British soldier who was hanged?
Yes, he was, for plotting with that rogue Benedict Arnold. It was taken just a few miles from here. Well, I was passing the giant tree where he was captured.
Yes.
I heard strange cries of mourning and wailing, as if the old Major himself had returned for the night to haunt the spot.
Oh, that's remarkable.
Have you heard of the woman in white, Master Crane, that haunts the dark glen at Raven Rock?
No.
She perished there in the snow years and years ago.
That's right.
And now, on winter nights before a storm, she's often heard to shriek. My sister heard her.
Yes, my mother heard her twice. Once when I was just a boy, she heard the woman wailing. Then the sound of a horse rushing wildly nearby. Then as the moon broke through the clouds briefly, she saw the horse rearing back, and the rider had no head.
Oh, my.
She said he had gone to meet the woman in white, to take her back to the graveyard before morning.
That's the most remarkable thing I've ever heard.
It's frightening, I tell you.
If Ichabod Crane enjoyed the tales of ghosts and spirits while cuddling in the chimney corner near a crackling wood fire, where no spectre dared to show its face, it was dearly purchased by the terrors of his walk home afterwards. What fearful shapes and shadows crossed his path in the ghastly glare of a snowy night. How often he was frightened by some shrub covered with snow, like a sheeted ghost.
Oh, that's only a bush.
How often did he shrink with fear at the sound of his own footsteps on the frosty crust beneath his feet.
Wow! Oh, what was that? Oh, it's nothing but my own footsteps.
And how often did he dread to look over his shoulder, lest he should behold some creature tramping close behind him, reaching out to place a hand upon his neck. And how often he was thrown into complete fright by some rushing blast, howling among the trees, thinking it was the galloping of the headless horseman on his nightly quest. After not many months in the village, Ichabod Crane, who had a soft and foolish heart towards the opposite sex, was observed paying considerable attention to Katrina Van Tassel, one of his musical disciples, and the neighborhood began to buzz with rumors of the courtship.
I see our schoolmaster spends more than an occasional evening on the porch of old Baltus Van Tassel.
You can be certain it's not the old farmer he's in there to see.
Who can blame him? Who can blame a man with an eye as good as his stomach?
And with Mr. Crane, his eyes are all in his stomach. Why, only last week he mentioned that Katrina Van Tassel was as plump as a partridge, ripe and melting and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's peaches.
A blooming lass of 18 is ripe indeed to be picked off and taken to the village church.
She's Van Tassel's only child. That's why he's kept her so long at home.
Well, if she isn't married this year, she'll be the prettiest old maid in the county, which comes from having too many admirers.
Well, Ichabod Crane seems a determined man. I think he'll need old Van Tassel's abundance to carry his stomach through the long winter.
Indeed. Some of his scholars who have seen him eat at their family table call him the bottomless pit of Sleepy Hollow.
Perhaps the Master Crane will yet have to conquer another foe before he wins the heart and property of Katrina Van Tassel.
Not the headless horseman Ichabod Crane loves to hear told of.
Not the headless horseman, but that rascal Brum Bones.
And indeed, Ichabod Crane was not the only suitor who visited the Van Tassel domain. Among the many young knights who went forth to rescue the fair Katrina from the dragon of Spinsterhood was a burly, roaring, roistering blade by the name of Bram van Brunt, the hero of the country roundabout, who was famous for his feats of strength and hardihood, and which earned him the nickname of Bram Bones. He was always ready for either a fight or a frolic, but more out of mischief than ill will. He and his boon companions were often heard dashing along past the farmhouses at midnight with whoop and halloo, like a troop of dawn cossacks, waking the old dames from their sleep.
Aye, There goes Brom Bones and his gang.
Such was the formidable rival Ichabod Crane had to contend against, and a stouter man than he would have shrunk from the competition, and a wiser man would have despaired. But Ichabod Crane persisted. Old Balt Van Tassel was an easy, indulgent soul who loved his daughter better even than his pipe, and, like a reasonable man and an excellent father, let her have her way in everything. Mistress Van Tassel, too, had enough to do to attend to her housekeeping and her poultry, and was known for her sage remark.
Ducks and geese are foolish things and must be looked after, but girls can take care of themselves.
So Ichabod Crane's courtship of Katrina Van Tassel continued, and Brom Bones began to plot to rid the village of the ravenous schoolmaster.
Hey, did you see his lank limbs run when we stopped up the chimney of the singing school and smoked him out?
Well, did you hear him tell of witches holding the meetings in the schoolhouse at night after we turned everything topsy-turvy?
And have you seen him on his steed? If that old nag he rides can be called a steed. With his short stirrups that force his knees nearly up to his chin, and his sharp elbows sticking out like a grasshopper.
And he carried his whip straight up like a torch.
And as the horse chugs along, his arms flap like a pair of wings.
Oh, if I could fight that schoolmaster in single combat, I'd double him up and put him on the shelf.
And indeed, Brom Bones tried everything to ridicule and annoy Ichabod Crane, even going to the trouble of teaching his scoundrel dog to whine in a most ludicrous manner. And then introduced it as another singing instructor, a rival of Ichabod's, much to the delight of Brom Bones' gang. But Ichabod Crane made his advances despite the tomfoolery of Brom Bones and the Sleepy Hollow boys. One afternoon, as Ichabod was leaving the schoolhouse, a young man came puffing up to the school door with an invitation for Ichabod to attend a merrymaking to be held that evening at Mynheer Van Tassel's.
It's a quilting frolic, sir, with dancing.
Oh, well, thank you, my good man. And I'll lay there'll be plenty of food, too.
6 o'clock, sir.
The gallant Ichabod spent an extra half hour brushing his best suit, thinking the whole time of the luxurious pies, the cakes and the hasty pudding, and the whole variety of delicacies waiting to be presented him by the delicate little dimpled hand of Katrina Van Tassel. When he arrived at the frolic, the people were already making merry. And though Ichabod Crane loved to gossip and laugh as well as another man, he directed his steps to the food table, where his expectations for a lavish meal were fully realized. He could not help, too, rolling his large eyes around him as he ate, and chuckling with the possibility that he might one day be lord of all this scene of almost unimaginable luxury and splendor. And the whole time, old Baltus Van Tassel moved about among his guests with content and good humor, and a face as round and jolly as the harvest moon.
Good evening, Master Crane. Fall to, help yourself.
Oh, thank you, sir. I am.
Don't eat so much, you'll miss the dancing, Ichabod.
Sure, all right.
Suppose even a meal such as this could fill Crane's bottomless pit.
All right, everyone, let's begin the dancing.
Ichabod prided himself upon his dancing as much as upon his vocal powers and his enormous capacity at the table. Not a limb, not a fiber about Ichabod was idle. How could he be otherwise than animated and joyous? The lady of his heart was his partner in the dance, and smiling graciously into Ichabod's amorous oglings. Meanwhile, Brom Bones, sorely smitten with love and jealousy, sat brooding by himself in one corner.
Look at the silly fellow, as double-jointed as a scarecrow.
Just as hollow inside.
Oh, no. After such a meal as I saw him eat, he couldn't be hollow. I think he ate a barn and 2 haystacks.
Speaking of hollow, doesn't Crane this week with Hans van Ripper?
I believe he does. Why?
Then he'll ride that bag of bones he calls a horse through Sleepy Hollow.
That is if the headless horseman doesn't get him.
And who's to say he won't?
Several of the Sleepy Hollow people were present at Van Tassel's, and as usual were doling out their wild and wonderful legends. Before long, when the dancing was finished and some of the guests had departed, the remaining people were sitting before the fireplace, listening to the tales of ghosts and goblins.
Tell us the tale of Old Brewer, Herr Van Houten. All right. Well, as you may know, Old Brewer didn't believe in ghosts. Not until one night when he was walking late near Sleepy Hollow. Suddenly, out of nowhere, with a rush of wind, the headless horseman was upon him and forced him to get up behind him on the horse. Then off they galloped over bush and hill and swamp until they reached the bridge. As they began to cross the bridge which led to the graveyard, the horseman suddenly turned into a skeleton.
Oh, my word.
And Old Brewer was thrown violently off the horse and into the brook. When he looked up, the headless horseman sprang away over the treetops with a clap of thunder.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't it through Sleepy Hollows that you must walk to return to Van Ripper's, Mr. Crane?
Why, yes, it is.
It was just such a night as this when I was riding through Sleepy Hollow on Daredevil, my favorite horse. I was overtaken by a rider who offered to race me to the church bridge for a bowl of punch. It was so dark I couldn't see him, but I accepted nevertheless. And we raced full speed through the darkness, but just as we came to the bridge, there was a flash of fire, and the other rider bolted and disappeared. But not before I saw him. It was the headless horseman.
Oh, no.
And his head was resting on the saddle.
Oh.
And he'd been talking to me.
Oh, no.
All these tales, told in that drowsy undertone with which men talk in the dark, sunk deep in the mind of Ichabod. As the revel gradually broke up and the people made their way home, Ichabod Crane thought of his journey homeward through the haunt of the headless horseman about whom he had heard so many recent tales.
Pardon me, are you going in my direction here, Van Houten?
Not tonight, Ichabod. We are staying with our daughter.
Oh.
Good night, Master Crane.
Oh, good night. Well, now, I suppose I'd better be hurrying along.
It was the very witching time of the night, as Ichabod mounted his swayback steed and rode slowly off into the dismal night. In the dead hush of midnight, he could hear the distant barking of watchdogs far away, low and mournful. No signs of life occurred near him, but occasionally the melancholy chirp of a cricket, or perhaps the guttural twang of a bullfrog from a neighboring marsh. All the stories of ghosts and goblins that he had heard that night came crowding upon his memory.
Oh, the night seems to grow darker and darker. Even the stars seem to sink deeper in the sky. Oh, what's that? Oh, it's only the gnarled branches of Major Andre's tree.
Ichabod was now in the very place where many of the scenes of the ghost stories had been laid. The enormous tulip tree, which towered like a giant above all the other trees of the neighborhood, was the very tree connected with the capture and hanging of Major Andre. As he approached the twisted branches of the tree looming before him, he began to whistle.
What was that? Oh, it's just the wind. Oh, there's something white hanging in the tree. Oh, it's just part of the trunk scathed by lightning. Yes, that's what it is. That's what it is.
And again, Ichabod started past the tree.
Oh.
Ichabod's teeth chattered and his knees smote against the saddle when he heard the strange groan. But it was only the rubbing of one huge bough upon another as they swayed in the wind about him. About 200 yards from the tree, a small brook crossed the road, and a few rough logs laid side by side served for a bridge across this stream. It was the very edge of Sleepy Hollow. As he approached the stream, his heart began to thump. Hoping to dash quickly across, Ichabod gave Gunpowder a kick in the ribs. But instead of leaping forward, the perverse old animal ran alongside the stream, down into the thicket of the brambles and bushes.
Boy, come on, get up there, come on. Come on.
The schoolmaster now bestowed a whip to the starveling ribs of old Gunpowder, who bolted forward, nearly throwing his rider sprawling.
Whoa.
Just then a noise by the side of the bridge caught the sensitive ear of Ichabod.
What's that?
In the dark shadow of the grove, on the margin of the brook, he beheld something huge, misshapen, black and towering. It did not stir, but seemed gathered up in the gloom, like some gigantic monster ready to spring upon the lone traveler.
Oh, who are you? Who's there?
Still, there was no answer. Again, Ichabod urged his old nag forward.
Come on, let's go.
And this time it trotted off. But its rider immediately began to sing a psalm tune. But the shadowy object moved alongside Ichabod's horse. He appeared to be a horseman of large dimensions and mounted on a black horse of powerful frame. Ichabod tried to quicken his pace, but the strange midnight companion also quickened his steed. Then Ichabod pulled up, and the other did the same. He tried to sing a hymn, but his parched tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He could not utter a note. The horseman said nothing to Ichabod, and the silence was more mysterious and frightening than the strange sounds that had troubled Ichabod earlier. On mounting a slight hill, which brought the figure of his fellow traveler silhouetted against the sky, the terrified schoolmaster saw that the rider was headless. And the horror was intensified as Ichabod saw that the head, which should have rested upon the cape-covered shoulders, was carried under his arm. Ichabod rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder. And away he dashed, stones flying and sparks flashing at every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as Gunpowder himself seemed possessed of a demon. The road led through a sandy hollow shaded by trees for about a quarter of a mile, where it crossed the bridge famous in Sleepy Hollow tales.
Oh, if only I could reach the bridge. I'm safe. It's the bridge where the ghost disappeared when he raised broad bones. Come on.
Ichabod raced, clinging to old Gunpowder's neck.
Come on.
Just as he sprang upon the bridge, Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer should vanish according to the rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. But just then he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups, and in the very act of hurling his head at him. Ichabod tried to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It encountered his cranium with a tremendous crash. And he tumbled headlong into the dust. And Gunpowder, the black steed, and the headless horseman all passed by like a whirlwind. The next morning, old Gunpowder was found without his saddle, with the bridle under his feet, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. But Ichabod Crane did not make his appearance at breakfast. The dinner hour came, but no Ichabod. The boys at the schoolhouse strolled idly about the banks of the brook, and inquiry was set on foot, and soon the saddle was found, trampled in the dirt near the church. The tracks of the horse's hooves deeply dented in the road, and evidently at furious speeds, but traced to the bridge, beyond which, on the bank of a broad part of the brook, where the water lay deep and black, was found the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and close beside it lay a shattered pumpkin. The brook was searched, but the body of the schoolmaster was not to be discovered. The mysterious event caused much speculation at church the following Sunday.
It is the exact spot where old Brewer landed in the brook after riding with the headless horseman.
He's been carried off by the headless horseman, sure.
And this is where you raised the Hessian, right, Brom?
It is, and I agree with Mistress Van Tassel. Surely he was carried away by the headless horseman.
The country wives, who are the best judges of these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means, and it is a favorite story of the neighborhood, often told round the winter evening fire. The schoolhouse, being deserted, soon fell to decay, and was reported to be haunted by the ghost of the unfortunate Ichabod. And when anyone strolls homeward on a still summer evening through the Sleepy Hollow, he may still hear the distant voice of the schoolmaster singing a hymn, or hear the rush of the headless horseman. But Brom Bones seemed untroubled by the disappearance of his rival, and shortly he carried off the blooming Katrina Van Tassel to the altar. Whenever the story of Ichabod was related, Brom always burst into a hearty laugh at the mention of the pumpkin, which led some to suspect that he knew more about the matter than he chose to tell.